Mr. Schaefer,
Tim Schaefer for Treasurer, John Chung.
Delilah Sotelo is not here. Michael Gunning, Chair.
Here.
We have a quorum.
We have two. We do have a quorum. Okay. I want to welcome everyone. Thank everyone for coming in and adjusting the schedule to accommodate our schedules. We're here today to discuss the audit results for the Caltrain Housing Finance Fund. I look forward to the presentation today. It's always good to see you, Mandy, I guess, when we do see you periodically.
Thank you.
I guess I just had a couple comments I wanted to share or to start with. I noticed on the opinion letter, it's dated the 7th, and it seems to be a lot later than it usually is. So I'm just curious why. I know we've had for 2 years in a row a couple issues, but certainly want Lori or Mandy to talk about that. And then I guess the second thing is, while there are clearly no findings in the financial audit, clearly the deficiencies in the Section 8 program continue. And I was hoping Delilah was here because I was going to say I was going to beat her to the punch because I know she'll bring it up. But just curious about where we are with that, why that continues. Is there an assessment being done? The management plan. What's the management's plan to handle that? So if someone from asset management would speak to that, that'd be helpful. But Tim, I didn't ask you if you had any comments, but certainly would open it to you.
You've reflected accurately what I
Good. Well, with that then,
concerns were.
let's get into it. Lori.
Okay, so addressing your first comment as far as the delay in the completion of the financial audit this year, every year we do have to wait for CalPERS to have their pension data audited.
Can I stop you 1 second? The minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just realized we should approve the minutes. If you have any questions, you take a look at them, or
I can't because I wasn't here for that meeting. Vince was here for that meeting.
So why don't we
So-
push that off to the next one?
Or at the end of the meeting.
If Delilah's here, she's here, she got it. Good. I'm sorry, Lori. I was looking at the agenda.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay, go.
I'll just start over again. Each year, in order for us to complete our financial audit, the CalPERS pension data needs to go through an audit of itself by the California State Auditor. This year, the report on the pension data was not released until October 26th. So we worked very closely with the auditors to get this out in time as fast as we could, and that date happened to be November 7th. So we know that this is something that is a problem for the agency. Last year we received the data in September of 2016, which caused a little delay also that year. And it seems like this is going to be something that we have to deal with going forward, is that we don't have any control over when that particular audit gets completed. And so this leads into a little comment about what we've done to try to take some steps to mitigate the problem of having to report by 11/1 each year. So we did submit a legislative proposal this year to move our annual reporting deadline from November 1st of each year to December 31st. And what this will do is really put us in line with CalPERS annual financial reporting deadline themselves. So, there really is, they're not late in the release of the data, but for our purposes and what we need it for to complete our financial audit, our financial reporting deadlines are not in sync
with everybody else.
So when everyone else is, they're later than us, and so our requests to release the data, to get it done early, they're not really addressing those things because they have to do their things on their timeline. And
we went back historically to see why we had an 11/1 financial reporting date, and we couldn't figure it out. Like, everybody else is 12/31 or 6 months after their books close, and ours, for some reason, was 11/1.
And it's been that way.
It's been that way since we were created, and we couldn't find any reference to why we had that 11/1 reporting date, so we said, well, then let's just change it. So we submitted a legislative proposal.
Tim?
Does that have any consequence on continuing disclosure agreements for the agency's bonds?
We did talk about that with Tim Sue, and he didn't believe so. He believed that we would still have the ability, there's a kind of a practice of providing them at a certain point in time, and
Yeah.
we would just have to do a good job of communicating the change. And I think our intent is not to deliver the financials at 12/31. It is to just have the leeway in the statute to reflect kind of the reality in the situation, and we would bring the audit as quickly as possible to the committee.
Okay.
I think
thank
we
you.
did determine that your continuing disclosure was 180 days. Didn't we
Yes.
determine that?
That
Yeah.
would
So
be-
you
That would be
would.
typical.
Yes.
Right.
So you're good.
Okay.
Okay. Well, legislative process isn't always a sure thing, but this certainly sounds like a slam dunk. Go ahead, Tim.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to be obsessive about this. I would encourage management, when you do this, to also speak with the rating agencies so that they're clear that there's not, that this is administrative. It's not, there's nothing hiding in plain sight. That's all. Sorry.
No, I think that's appropriate. That's very true. Good follow-up question.
If there's no further discussion, then I'm going to turn it over to Mandy Merchant. She's our principal from Clifton Larson Allen.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. I said I am Mandy Merchant from Clifton Larson Allen. We are your audit firm. You in front of you do have a presentation where I have summarized stuff that I feel and Lori management feels is important for the audit committee to review and management. So if you want to keep this handy. Also, you should have in your packet a copy of the audited financial statements. You will have the single audit report. You also have the communication to those charged with governance and a copy of the corrective action plan. So this is the stuff we're going to highlight during this meeting. Okay. Well, if you turn to the first page, just to kind of give you an idea of the CLA engagement team. We've been with you guys now 5 years. And consistently over the past 5 years, you have had myself and Liz Richardson on the engagement. In addition, this year we had Lexi Lee, who assisted us from the Pittsburgh office.
Can you advance the slide?
Oh, sorry. Hold on. And then finally, we had Joey Judson. He's actually from our new local office that we merged in this past year over in the western area of Sacramento, Galena and Company. So he was an addition, and hopefully actually going forward, we're going to be using a couple more people that are going to help assist us from the Sacramento office also. Okay, so this year for the financial statements. In this discussion throughout, we will refer to, so for Cali Chaffee, for the Finance Fund, it was for financial statements for 6/30/2017, and then we also issued 2 agreed upon procedures report that were related to 12/31/2016 that we'll talk about in brief at the very end. As part of the audit, just in case anyone doesn't know the audit process, we do come in, we initially do a risk assessment, we do interviews with staff and with management, we look at your internal controls, we test your internal controls, and then based on the assessment and everything that we come across, we decide what we should test substantively, like what is our risk. Obviously you all have a lot of big ticket items on your balance sheet, looking at your program loans receivable, your bonds payable, your interest, so all that kind of stuff we heavily beat up during the audit. A lot of confirmations we send out for this agency. So within these financial statements, we are going to have the auditor's report, the management discussion analysis, or the MD&A, which is prepared by management, the financial statements and footnotes, and then finally the supplementary information, which is additional analysis provided by management of the program information, more detailed. Okay, so statement and net position. The next 2 slides, what we did here is basically extracted the information out of the MD&A that shows the past 3 years and the change on the statement of net position. What I like to draw your attention to is the 2017-2016 change. This is the information we're going to kind of look at in more detail. which again, myself, Lori and Oksana, we delved into these numbers and think these are specific accounts that you should be aware of and kind of the changes that occurred. So if you flip forward 2 slides to page 6. So first, as you notice, the cash and investments, and we're looking at the current cash and investments and the non-current investments. There was a $184 million decrease in cash and investments, and that is mainly attributed to, and this is going to be a real key point throughout this presentation, about the transfer of HPA due to the Senate Bill 837. So that's going to be a lot. We're going to talk about that. But basically, that was mainly attributed to that, and there's that $131 million of investments that was transferred. And then obviously the difference also is related to, there's a significant amount of bonds paid down this year, other kind of decreases throughout that you'll see that makes up that difference. Also, program loans receivable decreased $462 million, and that's a combination of a couple things. Obviously, you had some purchases of new loans. You again had transferred to HPA about $202 million, and then the regular principal payments and repayments that occurred, about $401 million. And if you're interested, if you go back to note 3, actually provides you a pretty detailed review of the, let's see, that's what page I tagged that. Oh, I had it earlier. Okay, on page 28. And what's nice is that we show this side by side, 2017 and 2016, so you can see the comparison of loans purchased and funded in the prior year versus the current year, the amounts, you know, just regular principal payments and the amounts of prepayments that occurred. And then at the very bottom, you see that transfer to the HPA of the $202 million. So this gives you a really nice picture of what occurred during the year and in these accounts. Any questions on that, since that's like the big items on your balance sheet? Okay. All right, then another big item on your balance sheet is obviously the bonds payable. And this year the bonds payable decreased, and basically again that was a big offset between the new bond issuances and then a significant amount of redeemed bonds, and then again payment down of bonds. So there was a significant decrease in the bonds payable also. Okay, and if you turn to the next slide, slide 7. Derivatives, your interest rate swaps. That liability decreased $62.7 million. And again, right now, the market has been in your favor. So you don't have as much of a liability. You're also getting rid of the swaps. And also with that, in other assets, you did, in the prior years, you had a lot of collateral with the counterparties. And this year that's gone away. And now that's more, you're posting that collateral within your own investment securities. So that was another decrease that occurred on your balance sheet.
I want to stop and understand that better. This is collateral that the agency is posting. Is that change in any significant way attributable to the improvement in the agency's credit rating? I'm guessing it would be, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, especially if the collateral is not being held by the counterparty. They're trusting you. So. Okay, the next bullet point is just, you know, there was a new loans payable this year with the Federal Home Loan Bank. You guys have access to $100 million. As of year end, you've had spent about $80 million. So that is a new amount on your balance sheet. And if you, that's another one that I actually tagged in the back if you wanted to see more details on that. That is on page 43. You want to know a little bit more of the details. At the very top, talks about the loans payable. And the new portfolio with the Fannie Mae's and the Ginnie Mae MBSs. So some new things going on also. And then the final thing on the final account change that I thought was important to bring up is the deferred outflows of resources. Now that has two things that are within it. It has the interest rate swaps, and that basically is a decrease in the fair value, again, because the market is in your favor. And then there is an increase in the pension contributions. And again, that is a number that you really don't have control of. That is provided to you by CalPERS. So that did go up this year. And I don't talk much about the pension. I don't know if anyone has any questions about that in particular, but just that they're basically going up.
I guess my only other thought is it seems like the formatting of the audit just changed a little bit, and I guess that has to do with how we are presenting the pension aspect. Did I say that right?
Well, yes, and some audit or accounting standards, the GASB, required a different presentation of it, so, yeah.
Don wants to win awards.
I like when Don wants to win awards. That means we win awards.
That's right.
Good job.
That's good. Does anyone have any questions on any of the balance sheet items? Okay. All right. So the next slide is, again, the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in that position, or the income statement. And again, what I'd first like to do is just kind of draw your attention to a couple numbers on here. Do I have a mouse? Oh, I do. Okay. So we look down at the operating income. So if we're looking at the operating income for 2017 versus 2016, you can see there's a nice increase, $36 million in operating income. So we'll talk about more details of how we got to that point. And then let's go down to the change in net position before transfers down here, where you had $150 million at that point as compared to the prior year of $77 million. So that was an increase of $72 million. So we're going to talk about that all first, and then we'll get down to the transfers out. So that's obviously a key point. Might bring up a popular topic I've already talked about a couple of times. So, but then bottom line, you can see there was a decrease about $190 million. So let's turn the page and let's go over some of the highlights for the income statement. Okay, for the first part is just talking about the decrease in interest in the program loans receivable. And that was about almost $24 million decrease. And that's kind of a combination of not issuing as many loans as compared to prior years, and then more loans becoming prepaid and principal being collected, and then finally that transfer to the HPA, again, the SB 837. Now there was one of the reasons you had such a nice operating results this year is the $54.2 million realized gain in securities due to the sale of the Cal Plus program. That was, as you can see, an all-time high this year, $1.8 billion during fiscal year 2017. So that definitely helps with your results this year. Interest expense.
Can we stop right there? Mm-hmm. Those are the changes we made to our single-family programs. Just so you know, when Tim going over to the single-family programs and us making some programmatic changes, that counts to some of that, yes.
Okay, and then the next one, just interest expense. Obviously, as we talked earlier about bonds payable going down, just a direct correlation as interest expense is going to go down. Also, you have redeemed bonds that are at higher interest rates, and you've issued ones at lower interest rates. So that amount is obviously going to be decreasing. And then your provision for loan loss. Your every year management looks at the program loans receivable and decides, are these all going to be collected over the next, time. And due to the housing market just increasing, the unemployment rates decreasing, management does not expect as many losses as they did in the past. Things are really looking up. So there was a $10 million decrease in the provision for loan losses that is appearing in the other expenses. As you would have seen, there was a significant increase in other expenses because in the prior year, this negative amount was larger, and this year it's a lot less. If that makes sense. It kind of makes the number go opposite. Okay, and then...
Question on
Sure.
The surplus statement. Help me understand, I'm looking at other expenses, which are becoming a considerable sum and appear to be doubling every year. Help me understand what's in there.
Okay, so that's the one we're kind of hitting on right now. So that's a couple things. So in the prior year, the 27 million included a larger negative expense because the provision was so large. So when you have a change in your liability, it actually puts a credit into an expense account. So last year's was very large. This year it's a lot smaller. So last year was like 14 million, and this year's 2 million. And then the next one is that there was a $12 million increase in other expenses related to the service fees, the service release fees, and hedging costs associated with the Cal Plus program. So the two of those together gave you that big increase in other expenses. And again, so every year, you got to remember, as the as you have the allowance, and the allowance was, let's say, $100 million last year, and this year we're saying it only needs to be 50, that 50 million needs to flip to the income statement. So
Yeah,
it's
understood.
Yeah, yeah. So
Understood.
that's why it keeps every year getting.
And wouldn't it also
Bigger,
be
bigger.
partially attributable to the fact that the portfolio, we're not adding any new whole loans?
That-
and so
that's
the
what I'm trying to
portfolio,
get at.
the portfolio is paying off at
Thank
a
you.
relatively rapid rate, so that's gonna affect it.
That's what I'm trying to get at. Thank you. Okay.
What is the service fee? The next slide.
That's the
Service
service.
release fees?
Related to the CalPlus program, the $1.8 billion.
So when we sell our loans on the secondary market,
Right.
we're selling the service, releasing service release premium that you pay. And because of the high volume that we've been doing, 1.8 billion last year, and we're on track to pretty much the same, it's increased that level of service release premium associated with those transactions.
Okay.
Okay. And the second bullet point, there's a $19 million decrease in the fair value of investments, and that is due to the increase in the treasury interest rates. So basically, your portfolio is being valued a little bit lower this year due to what's kind of out there on the market, what the market availability is. And then, as we already mentioned before, the interest rate swap fair value, again, it's in your favor. So there was an increase. So this year, there was a significant kind of given back to you all that it increased in your favor by about $56 million related to that, the interest rate swaps.
It only took 11 years.
It was all part of our master plan.
Bad news, rates are up. Good news, rates are up.
While you're at SHRA, right?
And then the last one, obviously, where we get to the increase and the decrease in your net position of 190 million is this transfer out. So if you looked at page note 12 on the bottom of page 53, we did a 2-year comparison where you can see all the different transfers that occurred during this year, and you can see the big transfer of the SB 837, the total amount that was transferred out. So, so the $374 million that came out this year related to that.
And just for clarification, that's cash and receivables and everything.
That's everything all together.
Does anyone have any questions on the income statement? I threw out a lot of numbers, a lot of explanations.
I'm good.
I'm good.
Okay. So the next thing, I did a couple comparative analytics. I feel that it's important sometimes just look at a trend analysis to see what's been going on. So a couple of the stuff you probably know, you probably see it here, but I thought it was important just to bring to your attention. So a couple things, just looking at the derivatives and looking at the bonds payable, just kind of what's been going on the past 5 years. And on the derivative swap liability graph, just showing you the amount, the fair value of the swaps, and then the number of swaps. I remember when I started here, I remember being like, oh my God, they have over 100 swaps. Oh Lord. And now you're down to 66. So it's definitely good. That's something that's making the audit, a little bit different. And then also looking at the bonds payable. And we're gonna flip to another slide, but just as you look at the bonds as they're going down, and, as me and Lori were talking about it, just, the agency is just doing different ways of, bringing the programs. You're just getting into the MBSs, the TBA market. So there's just different things. So we expect to see these bonds payable decreasing. And then if you flip to the next slide, I'd like to say the direct correlation of bonds payable going down is the program loans receivable going down. So again, back in 2013, you had about $4 billion in programs loans receivable as compared to now about $2.6 billion. And also that bottom amount is the allowance. And in 2013, you had $146 million in allowance on your program loans receivable based on this year, $79 million. So it's really good to see that, you're able to, that those collections are coming in. You don't have to put those allowances anymore on those. I remember back in 2013, I was like, ooh, what's going on? So, very good. And again, this also has decreased based on SB 837, probably decreased a little bit faster because of that transfer. Any question on these graphs? kind of based on everything we talked about already, this is what you predict, you would assume to see, you expect it. So based on that, I think our expectation was met. Okay. All right, the next report, we're gonna get into the single audit report. So you do have a separate report for this. It's the smaller one. Now, as a requirement under the Single Audit Act, anyone that receives over $750,000 in federal money must have a single audit done in accordance with OMB. And so, like in every year, we tested your Section 8 project-based cluster. And for this, we come in and pull samples. We look at your MORs, we look at your residual receipts that you monitor, replacement reserves, everything associated with the different projects that you all monitor under asset management. So this year, we had one finding we consider to be a significant deficiency in internal control and then in compliance and other non-compliance. And there was actually two parts about it. First of all, we had 1 out of 15 projects that did not make the required deposit into the replacement reserves. And then we also had one project that didn't have an MOR perform within the 12 months. And basically, looking back, each year, I went back and looked at the prior year findings for 2016, 2015, and 2014, and we've consistently had a finding in this program. And we just thought this year, we kind of changed up our recommendation. It wasn't kind of just like, hey, make the deposits. It was more that just review asset management department. Based on discussions with staff, we did determine that there wasn't really strong written processes and procedures in place. So we would definitely recommend going back through there and just kind of working through your procedures, and then just reviewing your staffing levels. You know, like where people where they need to be. With the asset management and these different projects, you have about 93 projects as of 6/30 that you're kind of monitoring. So just looking at that kind of makeup, and if that's good.
Question?
Go ahead, you can.
With the greatest deal of respect and admiration for management,
So you need to just come on. You need to say.
I need to tell you that a repetitive finding like this is troubling.
Yes.
And so I'd like to hear,
So let me start and then I'll let Dawn.
discussion and
Yeah.
plans for remediation.
So we take full responsibility for this, and Mandy and I had a very heart-to-heart conversation. I was very disturbed by this. Senior management was very disturbed by this. Fiscal services was disturbed by this. And truth be told, when you look at multifamily, you have asset management and you have
Yeah.
lending. And frankly, we have literally for 3 years focused on lending, and asset management has been an afterthought. And so without anything serious bubbling up, we've turned our attention to lending. And so after this, and after a very robust discussion with our auditors, we have engaged Ben Frank, who did come in and do the overall organizational assessment when I first started,
Right.
and gave us a roadmap and got us on the right track to do a deeper dive into specifically asset management, because frankly, we own that it's been rather sloppy. And because whether that is organizationally, whether it's structured, workforce structured, staffing ratios, what is the problem? And we have engaged, and he's actually started, and he's about 70%
I would say
through with his
he's finished.
interviews.
He's finishing his interviews here today for the Sacramento location. He'll be through his interviews by I think, Tuesday next week in Culver City. He'll regroup, come back with some thoughts and recommendations. Then he'd go back and drill down in some key areas that he's identified, and then we'll get an action plan together and implement it as soon as possible. So our target is something like January 1 to make whatever changes we deem necessary.
This is not something that we're going to wait on. It has our full and complete attention. The initial assessment of just him completing his interviews here you're at yellow light stage, and this should be a warning, and now is the time for you to come in and make these corrective actions. Continuing on this path would be horrific, but that you've now seen the warning light and now committing to come in and fix it is the right thing to do.
So he'll be actively working with Michael Carroll and Cheryl McDonald and Janet Louie, our asset management chiefs throughout this process.
I would be particularly interested in hearing it doesn't have to be elaborate, but at least a follow-up report on, not necessarily on staffing and management, because I'm confident that executive management can do management things that need to be done. I'm mostly focused on the written policies and procedures. That's the part that rattled me.
Absolutely.
Well, and in addition, what went wrong?
Yeah.
Well, and let me just recap for Board Member Sotelo.
Sorry to be late.
No, that's okay.
Literally
This is
too late.
because I know this is something that she has been closely watching, and this has to do with our Section 8 programs and the continued findings in our Section 8 programs. And what we had said as management is this is deeply troubling to us. It has our full attention, and to be just candid, over the last 3 years, our attention and focus has been on lending, and without something glaring and anything going off the rails on the asset management side, we have put all of our attention on the lending side. But we have hired someone to come in, an independent consultant, and give us a complete deep dive into asset management. He started last week. He has completed all of his interviews here in the Sacramento office. He's going to be going down to the Culver City office. We have those interviews wrapped up on Tuesday. He's given us kind of an initial assessment of things that he thinks are going wrong, and we want to be on target to implement those changes immediately to fix those. He has told us basically you're at a yellow light stage, and so you need to fix them immediately. And so that's the course of action that we are taking on these findings.
And I would recommend that we, just to make sure that we fulfill our responsibilities, that we ask executive management for an update on this at a date certain.
Yeah, I don't think we want to wait till the next audit meeting.
Right.
I think we want to make sure, in fact, Don, as soon as it's in place,
I
and
think
you do a memo. and
no,
update
I would say no
committee.
later than maybe a March deadline.
Absolutely.
So let the minutes reflect that.
And that will include just any, even if we have to have a closed session on the settlement of any outstanding negotiations with, like Los Angeles, and have them happen there, or will that just include recommendations moving forward? Were there any settlements with the housing authority done? The administration of that? There was none? Okay, so maybe just.
They fixed it, but why did it happen to be fixed? That's the process.
Right.
Is what.
That's the policies
That's
and
the policy.
procedures that I'm
Yeah.
concerned
That you
about.
looked at? You did?
Yeah.
Mandy, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, nothing else.
Thanks, Mandy. Is that,
And then with the single audit report also, we did not have any financial statement findings. So just, that's the last highlight, so. Any questions?
Yes. I just, again, my paranoia creeps in, so I always want to look the auditor in the eye and say, is there anything that's provoking a little voice in the back of your head that isn't yet important enough to find its way into your opinion, but which you are concerned about?
My only concern was the asset management. This really was, I was very passionate about this one this year, and I felt the need to go to Tia, talk to Don, talk to Lori, but that's the only thing. Everything else, financial-wise, number-wise, we really dive in. A lot of your financial information is like third-party. A lot of bank accounts.
Right.
So it's like we can confirm everything. So I'm very comfortable with the numbers. It's more the program stuff. The program stuff kind of would keep me up at night.
Okay, thank you.
And I think with that, just to elaborate, Lori talked about it last night, sorry, but it's so important about the asset management is because, you're kind of like the first person to interact with these projects. And you can't forget, you have all these loans on your books. So asset management is responsible to making sure that there's not going to be any kind of default. If anything's going to go wrong, if the the financial viability of these projects is gonna go downhill, that's when it would eventually trickle into here. Because, you know, right now, we don't have an allowance on them, we have on multifamily,
Yes.
but there's never been a loss, you know, but that could be huge, you know, if a multifamily goes sour, that's a big number.
Yeah, okay,
That's it.
thank you.
Okay. And then the next report, oh, and just so you know, in your packet, you should have, or maybe it was handed out, a corrective action plan. There is now a separate, I don't know why, but OMB decided to separate the corrective action plan that will be submitted into HUD, just stating what Kelly Chaffee's plan is for this one finding.
Where's
Or is
that?
that,
It's,
It is in your package.
It's in the packet
It's in
after the single audit?
4D2.
Yeah, 4D2.
Is it also part of the,
No,
Is it
they've
part of the big
separated out.
packet?
yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, is it
so
part
it's
of the
page
big?
abbreviated.
94.
Page 94,
Okay,
thank you.
that helps.
Is it more
It's at the
abbreviated?
very end.
Yeah,
In terms
just
of the
split, yeah, I'm
response.
asking for as much.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
So the single audit that you have, the management response in there is much more detailed in terms of what
Right.
the action's gonna be. The one she's referring to is much more
Yes.
It's
brief.
the ones required.
It's just the
obviously.
last.
Yeah. Okay, so then the next report we're gonna look at is our communication to the board, to the audit committee. So I'm not sure what page that is on, but it is another smaller report. And this is just a really overall highlight of kind of the audit process. Kind of talking about, you know, were there any new, does everyone have this, any new accounting policies that went into place? As you can see this year, we did have GASB 82, which is just related to the pension. Yeah, that was in your bound one. Accounting estimates. You all have a significant amount of accounting estimates that are within your financial statements, you know, that management determines. We review, we do significant procedures and make sure that they make sense. They're not biased. Oops. Thank you. So the first one, obviously, the allowance for loan losses is one that's based on that. There's two different ways you look at that. You look at for specific identification of loans, and then also you do an overall historical. So you do a look back. So do like a general allowance, which management does. Also the fair value of investments. Management gets information from others, third parties that help with that amount. And then finally, obviously, the fair value of the derivatives. That's determined internally. And then we actually send out third-party confirmations with all the counterparties and look at those amounts. Do they seem reasonable? So we have no issues with them.
Okay, sorry, I want to just dwell on that.
Yeah.
So could you describe to me, not in agonizing detail, but a little bit more detail, what you asked the counterparty for and what you get?
We ask for a statement of the fair value, so they provide us straight from their system.
Based on their mark-to-market.
Yeah, so obviously they're
Their
mark-to-market.
mark-to-market at the offered site.
Yes, and obviously theirs is always higher.
Right.
So we get a statement and they provide each swap, and then what the value that they deem to be at 6/30/2017. And then we compare it to internally and just see, and like we have like kind of like materiality and variance that we can deal with, and every year, actually they're getting better. Over the past couple years, we had some big swings, and we don't have to go back to them. But this year, actually, everyone came in pretty consistent, probably a couple $100,000 off. They would be a little bit higher than you all, but nothing like egregious.
No big surprises there?
No big surprises, no. So that was good. Always good to see that.
Okay,
So.
thank you.
Okay, and so then just overall, there was no uncorrected misstatements in the financial statement, and that would be that there was maybe a difference that we came across, but it wasn't material enough for us to make the change, so we pass on it. There was none of those. No corrected misstatements this year, so that was good. And then just everything else, we didn't have any disagreements with management. Obviously attached to this is the management representation letter where everyone signs their life away to me. So that's at the back, lots of things they have to say they did. And then finally at the end, just talking about the required supplementary information, the MD&A, and then the pension schedules, and then the CFA, the Schedule of Expenditure of Federal Awards. So that is a requirement to communicate to you all. Do you have any questions about this overall report?
One of the things that I liked about the audit itself was the explanation of all the reallocations based on SB 837, and I thought that was really helpful in the report. I'm just wondering from a report back to the overall board, whether we could share that part of the analysis, or whether, you know, as your cover letter to, from the auditors to us, you can really speak to that, so that, because there were so many variances that it was important for us to understand what was behind it,
Yeah.
as opposed to just looking at it as a financial impact.
Yeah, there was a lot in there this year. And I think earlier, if you have your statements in front of you, the key footnote to look at was at the bottom of page 53, note 12, where it really showed the overall impact of the transfer, which included the investments program loans receivable of $374 million, $1 million. And I think, Laura, you have a more robust breakdown that kind of goes into all that. I mean,
Right,
not on your
as far as specific programs, the amounts that were transferred out of each of the programs and going into HBA, so if that's something you feel that, you know, could provide more explanation about the results this year.
I think it would. I mean, I think it would help board members understand it a little bit, you know, better. And, you know, I don't recall the impetus for why the legislative change needed to happen. But
Because we wanted the-
yes, I know we wanted to arrange it,
But part of it was there was like 6 different programs. They all had statutorily different interest rates, and it was a mess. And so part of the governor's call to streamline and make things more efficient, we collapsed all of those various down payment assistance program into one down payment assistance program that would go with our first lien lending. We used to do the standalone down payment assistance programs, and so this made for a more efficiently run program that was more consistent with other HFAs in the nation. And so those were the reasons why, the policy reasons behind why we had made that change.
So I just think that when reporting back to the board, I think it would be important to make that correlation.
Okay.
And to let them know how it's reflected in the audit and,
Okay.
you know, has the impact on the audit.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be so detailed, but, you know, a broad statement would be great.
Now, the next slide I'm gonna skip real fast since Mr. Gunning has to leave, because I think the last slide I think is most important for future things coming in the future. So what's coming in the future? What's coming next year? GASB 75. This is the new, as you remember what happened with GASB 68 when the pension liability, the full amount of the pension had to be reported on the books of the agency. Now 75 is requiring the post-employment benefits to be reported on the books. Based off my very preliminary reading of the GASB 75, since it is long, and we have people internally that will memorize it for me. I did want to kind of, my specialist. I just want to just put out there what we're looking at. Now again, this is just hypothetical, but when 68 came out, we didn't really have a basis for how these liabilities would hit. We had no clue what the number was going to be. So now we kind of like generally get the idea. So what we did is we got the GASB 68 report, which you can't find online. You guys had to get it.
Yeah.
So we got the 68 report from the state, and basically looking at the unfunded actual accrued liability per their 6/30/26 teen statements. So they basically have 2 discount rates, and that's, you know, they show these amounts out there. So for the whole state, and okay, I take that back. For just the other state agencies, not including the CSU, yeah. It's either 23 billion or 28 billion. And using the allocation that was used for the pension at the 0.1605%, we're thinking that you're between a $37 to $45 million liability that'll be put in the books next year. Now again, there's all kinds of assumptions, all kinds of stuff that can change, rates.
And that will become a balance sheet item.
That'll become a balance sheet item. And they'll have the same stuff.
And onto the balance sheet.
And they
Yeah, and it's the same stuff with these deferred inflows and outflows, subsequent payments and measurement date, all that kind of stuff will also play in. And it's really good that you're changing your date, because I forgot, we gotta wait for this next year.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's another report.
Method to the madness.
Yeah. So I just kind of want to put that out there, just because again, it's not 100%, but just to let you guys know that that is coming in the future, and there will be some sort of range.
So I have a question. So with this going out of the footnotes and onto our balance sheet, is that going to affect our ratings?
Well, it'll be evaluated as a part of our overall financial position as they.
So something that we have zero control over.
but they know we have it.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
rating
everybody-
agencies,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
They know
Do they get it?
I'm sure they're factoring something, you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
They've been wanting you to measure this for 15 years.
But it'll be written up.
Yep,
Yeah, and
You
that's,
know it'll be written up.
yep.
Yeah, it's unfair, but it'll
Yeah.
be written up.
Any
It's just-
excuse, yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
yeah, and that's a good point that we might want to in the future really pull out these two huge liabilities on your balance sheet because they kind of currently are a little buried in other liabilities. We might just want to be like pension liability, OPEB. That way, when the rating agencies look, they're like, oh,
It
ignore
just
that.
separate, right?
Yeah,
separate
no,
it out.
I'd vote for that. I think it'll make it
Yeah.
a lot easier to evaluate the financials.
Yeah. So. And then just overall, just thank you to the staff. You know, I'm pretty proud of this presentation. Me, Lori, Oksana, you know, we worked pretty hard. We went into kind of, you know, guys, give you guys a really good overview since there was a lot of changes this year. So I'd like to thank you all and all the staff. Each year, you know, makes it really pleasant to get this done. We did have a tight crunch this year, but we kind of knew it was coming. So does anyone have any, Mr. Gunny, do you have any questions before you have to leave?
No, just thank you, and also thanks to Lori and her team. Certainly appreciate the work. We know how long this takes. That's it for me. Don?
I'd just like to second that and thank CLA for their partnership in helping us get this audit done in the
Yeah.
time that we did get it done. And also to Lori and Oksana for their leadership and all the hard work of the fiscal team. They put in long nights and weekends over the last month or two to try to make this happen, so I want to give a shout out to them.
Weekends.
Yeah, no, they did. They
They did.
worked hard because
Working really hard.
waiting for that information that we didn't
Exactly.
have and then trying to put it all together and get it as
Plus,
close
they're
to
trying to
November
help us
1st.
win some awards.
You got it, what the?
Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah,
We got the 26, we got it from CalPERS.
yeah.
Good turnaround. Tia, you-
Yeah, so the words that they're talking about, this is just the audited financial statements, but we're gonna put together a CAFR, which includes a letter of transmittal, the actual financial statements, and a lot of charts and graphs. So that we plan on having ready by the beginning of December. Submission to GFOA, or the Government Finance Officers Association, is December 31st.
Oh,
So we are gonna try to have that
Submit our
done
first
and out to everyone, you know, the first week of December, and that's,
And then
What we're
how do
shooting
we,
for.
how do we then present it to the board? Because I think there's some really important findings in terms of operating expenses being at the same level, the productivity increasing. Because
Do we want to
net
do that at the
income-
December board meeting? Do we want to do a report out or do we want to do it in January?
Oh,
It's
January.
you
January,
all.
January might be better
January.
because
I
we
Yeah.
can
think
actually,
January's better.
we could probably attach
Give
the
us a
CAFR.
chance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Right.
which would be, help with the readability and the, okay.
Yeah.
We can do the audit committee can do the report out on the audit and,
January.
at the January board
To
meeting.
Because of the-
non-bean counters, the CAFR is more motivating.
Mm-hmm,
Yes.
mm-hmm.
and then we're also gonna submit for another award, but that one is a little later. I mean, same deadline, but will be reduced after the CAFR, it's the PAFR. So it's the Popular Annual Financial Report. So,
Oh.
yes, if we wait until
I didn't know
January,
anything about that.
yeah, then we can
It's
talk
more of
about
a,
it.
it's more of a very, very condensed.
A condensed
That's very
CAFR,
readable to leave
yes.
behind for people.
Okay.
So then maybe, just to recognize the award that we did receive, maybe we should
Oh,
do.
Haven't received
no,
We
it
haven't
yet.
received it
no,
yet. This
submission.
is the first time they are submitting it. They
Oh,
want to, Don wants to receive
Well,
it.
no, no, no.
He's been
When-
beating
when
up
they
his
receive
staff
it.
trying to get it.
When
When,
they
okay, let's be clear,
receive
when we receive it.
We will have GFOA, we'll try to get one of their representatives to come and present it to the
Great.
board. That would be my hope
Right,
anyway.
that'd be awesome.
Can I do one
yes, Mr.
housekeeping
Chair.
item until I was back?
Oh.
The minutes,
Oh, yes.
do you have any comments or?
No.
anything on it?
No comments.
Good, so let's deem those approved then. Good, all right,
And then item 5, do you want to handle that right now?
yes.
So very quickly, item 5 relates to a provision in the audit committee charter which calls for an annual review of the audit committee charter to determine if there are any updates or changes the committee would like to make to the charter. At this time, staff is making no recommendations for changes to the charter. However, if the committee members would like to discuss the charter, a copy is in your agenda package. If you'd elect to make any changes, then we would have to take those changes to the full board for adoption at a later meeting.
I'm fine with what the charter requires us to do now.
We're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Real quick, because I know you have to go. We did have the NCSHA board meeting. Calhfa did win 2 awards. We didn't have our regular board meeting. 2 two awards that we won was our multifamily lending rebranding and rollout,
Ooh, nice.
national award for that, and our HR wellness program. We all have stand sit desks. We have a nice wellness program, and so our wellness program, employee wellness program, won a national award, NCSHA. And Tina was re-elected to the NCHB board and is now a member of the executive as the secretary. Yes, I'm on the I was re-elected as well, and I'm sitting on the executive board as the executive at large for NCSHA.
Great.
Yes. So
Would you
now,
be kind enough to send me some kind of communication on the multifamily award? I'd like to
Yes.
have my principal look at it.
absolutely.
He's wound his $2 watch right now. He's proud.
Yeah.
Okay, and I was gonna, leading up to that, we all talk about how much we've worked on our lending programs. Well, our lending programs are in jeopardy.
Yeah.
And this is due to the proposed housing tax reform, which is one of the reasons why I'm not going down to Sillamar, is so that we can keep an eye on that. I know Treasurer Chung is doing a big press conference this morning. I have copies of his letter for you all to take a look at, but that is something we are watching extremely closely, because the elimination of private activity bonds for our multifamily, which is what we pair with our 4% tax credits, is significant in the state of California. And that has been one of the ways in which we've used our core lending program, which is the FFB, to get at new construction and substantial rehab, is to marry it with 4% bonds and private activity bonds and 4% tax credits, which that proposal is trying to eliminate. And so that really goes to the production of affordable housing in the state of California. And that big housing package that we just the legislature and the governor just signed is all predicated on leveraging those monies with the 4% and the private activity bonds. So we have really been watching that very closely. We have developed a plan internally, strategically, on how we are going to deal with this, is that we are focusing and prioritizing the conduit issuance piece so that we can protect as much volume cap as possible between now and the end of the year. And we will reevaluate our lending programs in January. But the idea now is to statewide issue as much bonds as we can between now and the end of the year, should the because the way the legislation is drafted, you won't have the ability to issue private activity bonds after December 31st.
Okay.
So we do have an internal plan of how we're trying to manage
Do you
that
have
issue.
do you have to create projects to support that?
Yeah, and so
issuance?
what we're doing, is we're working with our existing pipeline. We're reaching out to developers. We're working very closely with SIDLAC
Yeah.
to coordinate those efforts so that we would be issuing bonds for actual projects.
I'm probably not telling you anything you haven't heard yet, but the Ways and Means Committee markup session on Tuesday produced a string of 12 or 14 amendment defeated 16 to 24. Amendment defeated 16 to 24. It was eerie. It was eerie when you just worked your way down the list.
It was just straight party line.
It's pretty clear. It's pretty clear where we're headed here.
Yeah.
Well, it'll have to be fixed in the Senate.
Yeah.
So I just gave you the treasurer's information that he gave out on from his press release that he did this morning at 9 o'clock.
Yep.
And I think he also provided since 2013, bonds only projects and 4% bond and 4% tax credit and bond projects by congressional district. So you have that
And there's a
information.
letter going to each member of the California delegation specific to his or her district. And the basic takeaway here is, I'll speak candidly and only for myself. The basic takeaway here is, decide now who you want to be pure and loyal to. Your constituents or an ideology.
Didn't I just read that article?
I think you did.
It's true. That's a good point.
So I just wanted to provide you guys with that information. We'll probably do a memo to the full board as well, since we
I
didn't
was
have
just
a
going to
full board
suggest
meeting.
that, because who knows what levels of contacts the members of the board have, and I think this is an attempt to rally and do all we can do to protect this activity because it's critical. Any other comments from you guys?
And we're not done yet on this. This is, this is, we understand in our office that this is gonna have to be, you know, a war of attrition. We started with this because this has been so critically important to my principal, but we're not done. I mean, this, remember, California's also got $86 billion worth of outstanding debt. And since we've been here, we've refunded $8 billion of that. And of that $8 billion, almost half has been advanced refundings. So there's a lot of other stuff going on in this tax proposal that is significantly concerning to us. And, you know, what you see here is
Just
not,
the beginning.
it's the beginning, it's not the end.
Absolutely.
Okay. And I should also point out, again, without, I want to be careful that I don't editorialize too much on this, but the National Association of State Treasurers is, you know, their fur has been rubbed the wrong way on this, but they've not been particularly effective at this because 35 of them are Republicans. Okay. So, you know, we're feeling a little lonely here, but we've been here before.
Who do you serve?
Check.
Any comments from the public? Good. Seeing none, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Manny, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.